here to have a quick overview of the EC Council's CHFI Forensics program. So what we're going to do, spend the next 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes, just going through what's involved in forensics, the requirements within Ireland, and the process for forensic investigation. So let me flick on to the next slide. Let me introduce myself. My name is Hanna. I'm a GRC and cyber warfare consultant. I've been working in IT and information security now for the last 16 years, and I've specialized in information security for the last 11 years. I am not a trainer. I am a consultant that trains. I have done forensic investigations. I have been in court as a technical witness, and I consult on various information security matters, one of those being forensics. So these are the little objectives we have for this afternoon, this evening. We're going to take a look at really what the process of forensic involves, what the details are, and we're going to take a look at what skills and resources that you need within your business in order to conduct a successful forensics case. And at the very end, we'll close out just a couple of slides at the very end on CHFI and the course that we're offering and talking about. So hopefully you won't find this a marketing pitch. Hopefully you'll find this reasonably useful. It's about CHFI and forensics. So why investigate? Well, I've got a growing number of cases in the UK. UK is my main market. There's a growing number of cases throughout Europe. The idea is that forensics is not as much about investigating hacks and hacking crimes as it is about protecting your business against litigation. You see, information security, a lot of people will say information security is about the highest level of protection for your data, but I would disagree. Information security is about protecting your business from financial loss. That financial loss could be a result of a hack, where you do pen testing and information security and firewalls, or it could be a financial loss due to litigation. Litigation is somebody suing your business for financial gain because of something you've done or done incorrectly. So an awful lot of what we work on is trying to protect your business from litigation, from your employees being able to sue you, being able to take you to court, being able to litigate. For example, here we have a little scenario. The little scenario is really quite straightforward. Your boss suspects Dave, an employee, of downloading illicit material. I've just checked. I hope we've no Daves in the audience tonight. Okay. You log on to Dave's machine after he leaves the office. You find offensive, illegal material on his computer, and you obtain a copy onto Write Once Media. So this is a little forensic investigation you've done. This is the scenario. The question is, have you done anything wrong? Okay, so let's see who can come back with an answer. The little question pane is down your right-hand side. Who's going to type me in what has been done wrong in this little case? So you suspect Dave of downloading illicit material on a work computer. You log on to the machine after he leaves the office. You discover that he has been downloading, say, softcore pornography, and you obtain a copy of the information using Write Once Media. What is the first thing that's gone wrong? Well, there's several issues with this. The first issue is, in fact, that who can start a forensic investigation? The only body within your office that can actually start a forensic investigation is your HR department. And you need reasonable grounds to investigate. And it's not you that comes up with the reasonable grounds to investigate. It's your HR department that should receive the complaint, that should start a disciplinary investigation and the request to investigate Dave, if you wait till Dave leaves the office, you've got... So if you wait till he leaves the machine, the second thing is you've logged on to his machine. Once you log on to his machine, you have tampered with evidence, because the evidence is Dave's comments, and when you log on to get a copy of the data, you have changed the evidence. That evidence is no longer submittable in a court of law. You can't go into a court of law and say, here's Dave's images, because you logged on and you made changes to that computer. How do you prove that you didn't plant those images on his machine? Next, it says you discover offensive illegal material. Offensive to who? What does illegal mean? Does it mean that it's criminal within the Irish legal system? Or does it mean it's a breach of policy and procedure? If it's a breach of policy and procedure, are your policies and procedures correctly implemented? And then finally, you obtain a copy onto Right Once Media. And yet again, there's another issue. How did you copy it? Did you use a forensically court-approved method, or did you copy and paste? You see, forensics is a minefield of potential issues. And if you get any of the potential issues wrong, you ruin the case. You stop the case in its tracks, and you can't continue because you'll never be able to successfully bring it to court. You see, this is all about HR internal processes within your business versus the court rules of evidence. If you go to HR and you say, this is the evidence, Dave definitely did it, and your HR department says, we believe you, your HR department is judge, jury, and executioner. They literally are the law within your business. Once you step outside the business, what HR says doesn't matter, because when you go into a court, it's HR versus the court. The court rules every single time. If the evidence that you have doesn't meet the court requirements, the evidence that you've gathered is unsubmittable, and the process that you've used to gather the evidence makes the evidence unsubmittable because you've tampered with it. So you can't use the evidence and you can't use the original machine. You're now standing in court. You've sacked Dave for downloading softcore pornography. You're now standing in court. Dave says, I didn't download softcore porn. You're now standing in the dock. The judge turns around and says, where's this evidence? You're not allowed to submit the evidence if it hasn't been compliant with the court requirement. And this is the whole root of litigation. Every single case that you might undertake, should it be investigating an abusive email? Should it be investigating somebody who spends all their time on eBay running a business from the office? Should it be investigating softcore pornography, a hack? Should it be investigating embezzlement, fraud, somebody scanning their mileage on their expense account? Not that anybody would ever do that, of course. Any of those investigations can potentially end up in court. And when you go to court, it doesn't matter what HR department says. It doesn't matter what was acceptable inside your business. You must make sure that you have followed the chain of custody, that your evidence meets the court requirement. This is the basis of corporate forensics. To be able to do a corporate forensic investigation, you must first prepare to investigate. You must make sure there's a policy. The policy must be correctly implemented. The policy violations must be recorded, and users must be aware of the impact on the policies. If your policies aren't good enough, you can never do a computer investigation successfully. Think about it. Under European legislation, your employees have a human right to privacy. If you wish to do a forensic investigation, you might be breaching their human right to privacy, which is a serious criminal breach. So you have to make sure that your policies and procedures protect the business to allow you to do a forensic investigation. Once you get that into place, the forensic investigation itself is almost like a recipe. You always follow the same recipe in the same way, and you always get a successful outcome. You make an initial attempt, you determine a preliminary design or approach, you create a detailed design, you determine the resources. By the way, look, the first 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, you must do the first 4 steps before you've touched a computer, before you've touched a hard drive. In court, you will have to prove that you've got the expertise to do forensics. And an expert has minutes of forethought. In other words, before you start, because you're an expert, you should be able to say, well, this is what I expect to happen. I expect to go round, I expect to get a copy of the machine, I look for images, I'll try to make sure in the proxy server you can see the web traffic where the images were downloaded. I'll use Active Directory to prove he's logged on. I'll get CCTV footage and door access control logs to prove he was in the building. You see, you need to plan your case before you start. An expert always plans stuff before they start. Only then can you successfully do a forensic investigation. One of the important things is that once you touch the evidence, you must be able at a later date to be able to prove in court that you haven't tampered with the evidence. And this is called the chain of custody. And you must use a chain of custody form to prove where the evidence was seized, who the evidence was seized by, and everybody who handles the evidence, who transports it, who looks at it, must be listed on a chain of custody. The chain of custody is trying to prove that nobody could have handled or tampered with the evidence. And that's a critical part of making sure that the evidence that you obtain is submittable in a court of law. The court standards are the chain of custody. We must use court-accepted methods, for example, taking handwritten notes. There are lots of software programs you can use, but you're always better in a courtroom to have handwritten notes that are taken concurrently, or taken at the time it occurs. You can't write stuff off afterwards because that doesn't count. I mean, one of the things I always tell people on the course, one of the most powerful tools for crime fighting that a police officer has is their little black book. That's because when you take notes at the time that something happens, they can be used in court as evidence to submit to support your testimony. You must have expertise in the field and you must be accredited. These are all requirements for you to end up in court. The compliance requirements are quite simple. You keep a case log, your handwritten notes. You might want to video your evidence capture. You might want to have a witness present to say you captured the right computer and the right hard drive. You must use evidence bags to try to prove that the evidence wasn't tampered with while it was in storage. An evidence bag is a cheap plastic bag that is tamper-proof, that has a GUID, a GUID, a globally unique identifier. The evidence must be stored in a secure location and you must be able to maintain your impartiality. You see, during a forensics examination, we can never say they did it. We can never say Joe Bloggs downloaded the softcore port. We're never allowed to say that. What we must say is, we found this evidence that Joe Bloggs was logged on. We found this evidence that he searched. A search was done for softcore porn. We found this evidence on the proxy server that the search went to the internet. We found this evidence on the proxy server that the images were downloaded. We found this evidence on the local hard drive that there was softcore pornography. What we never say is, he's guilty. That's not within our remit. We're about obtaining evidence, not about proving whether they did it or not. Impartiality is extremely important. As we suggest, there are loads of different areas that you can get evidence on. During a CHFI forensics course, we have to cover many different formats, and it's changing all the time. We have to cover iPhone forensics. We have to cover BlackBerry forensics. We have to cover forensics on MP3 players and USB drives. There are so many different locations of evidence these days. You have to be a technical expert on gathering evidence from many different devices. And again, this is something you have to make a decision on. If somebody in your office asks you to gather evidence from a mobile phone, from a salesperson who's been embezzling money, how do you go about that? How do you respond to it? Because the first thing you do is extremely important. Because the first thing that you do, if that tampers with the evidence, if that changes the evidence, then that evidence is no longer submittable. So there's all sorts of technical requirements that you need to go through to be able to understand and capture and investigate the evidence correctly. The process itself is extremely simple. Forensics is easy. It's like a recipe. We follow the same recipe every time, and as long as we don't take shortcuts, as long as we don't mess it up, we're always guaranteed a successful outcome. A successful outcome simply means we're able to secure evidence and gather it in a way that allows us, should we have to submit it in a court of law. That's a successful forensics case, being able to take evidence and submit it in a court of law. As you can see, it really is a rather easy recipe. It's a very straightforward way of working. There are all sorts of records that you can examine, and when you're writing notes, you have to start using terminologies that are used in courtrooms. Like we get computer-generated records, which are things like logs, and we could get computer-stored records, things like a Word document or Excel spreadsheet. So when you're writing your notes, it's important as well to make sure the terminology and the language you're using is the same terminology and language that a solicitor, barrister, or courtroom will use as well. There are a few widely accepted guidelines for forensic analysis. The idea is to analyze the media and report the findings with no presumption of guilt or innocence. The media we use to capture evidence must be sterilized. It's not just blank. It has to be sterilized data. A true image, something called a bitstream image. Remember we said we couldn't just copy the image. We had to use a court-approved tool. Bitstream imaging is the court-approved method of obtaining the image. And then we must make sure we maintain the integrity of the original media. For example, we've got to do some details. Before we receive the evidence, we've got to make sure that we've taken careful notes on the crime scene, on where we're gathering the evidence from, to make sure we can say that it was the right computer, the right hard drive, that we've captured the right evidence, that we haven't destroyed any evidence, that we haven't manipulated any evidence. So taking notes at the scene. One of the things that you'll have to get your head around are things like bitstream imaging tools, forensic workstations, and secure evidence containers. For example, bitstream copies are specific types of software. This is not copy and paste. It's not robocopy. These are specific forensic approved tools that can create physical copies of ones and zeros. A bit-by-bit copy of the original medium. And what we end up with is a bitstream image. You see, we never investigate the original evidence. The original evidence is secured, it's put in an evidence bag, and it's locked away in a secure container. We create an image of it before we secure it, and it's the image, the copy, the bitstream copy that we investigate, how do we prove that the copy we're investigating contains exactly the same information as the original evidence? Well, what we'd have to do is to be able to prove it was exactly the same. So what we're looking at is digital signatures. And we're able to use things like CRC checks, MD5 checks, and SHA-1 checking algorithms to confirm that the evidence is identical. So in other words, the tool that we're using to do the copy process should create MD5 and SHA-1 hashes to prove that every single file that was copied from the original target to the bitstream image is absolutely identical. You see, we're not allowed to make this up as we go along. This is a fixed recipe. MD5 and SHA-1s are really essential to be able to submit your evidence in a courtroom and have it accepted by a judge. It's the way we try to prove the evidence hasn't been tampered with. There are different ways of doing that as well. We can use non-keyed hash sets and keyed hash sets. A non-keyed hash set is an individual hash to identify a file. A keyed hash set is used in encrypted data to identify encrypted data and prove that it wasn't changed. And again, when you're doing forensics, your expertise is supposed to be more about the difference between non-keyed hash sets and keyed hash sets than it is about hacking or the internet or hard drives. Your expertise is supposed to be on forensics, and these are the tools of a forensics examiner to try to prove that stuff hasn't changed in a courtroom. Where do you do your forensic investigations? Well, we would suggest that if you're going to do a forensic investigation, that you need a computer forensics lab. This is different from a data recovery lab. A data recovery lab might recover information if a manager drops a hard drive with important information on it. A computer forensics lab is a physically secure environment using computers that have been sterilized and software and methods that are court approved. So this is very different than simply doing data recovery. Data recovery is part of what we do, but we must do it in a court approved, forensically sound manner. And to do that, you would normally use a computer forensics workstation. Now, you might disagree with me, but I would very strongly argue the only correct way to do forensics, to have your evidence submitted in a court, is to use hardware techniques to do it. You see, if you use software, software can be misconfigured, it can be compromised, you can make mistakes. When you're using hardware, it's much easier to prove integrity of systems. So what we suggest is that you use forensic workstations and forensic workstation hardware. A forensic workstation could be your laptop with special software on it, with a kit of forensics hardware that you go and pull out of a cupboard when you need it. So it doesn't have to be dedicated workstations. It can simply be an office with a locked door that you do your work in if you're doing a forensic investigation. For example, it's a very obvious one. You're not allowed to do a forensic investigation in an open office. Well, if I'm suggesting that somebody's downloading softcore pornography, well, I don't want other members of staff hearing about that. If I do a forensic examination in an open office and somebody oversees what I'm doing and starts discussing that and talking about it, and the rumor mill gets going, well, we could open up a whole kettle of worms in terms of litigation and reputational damage and bringing the employee into disrepute. Again, the litigation is all open. So again, the idea of a forensics lab is simply a physically secure area. It could be as simple as an office, a meeting room that you might use, that you lock the door, that nobody can look over your shoulder. When you go to do forensics, choosing the right software is extremely important. And one of the things that you will have to do at some stage is try to evaluate the different software and hardware choices you have to make sure that it fits with your budget, your requirements, and your methodology. And there's a huge choice. This is only a selection of tools, and we cover many different tools in the CHFI course to give you experience so that you can select the tools that best suit you and your requirements. We're coming towards the end of this little session, okay, and we just want to do a couple of slides on the CHFI course. And the real reason is, look, the number of incidents is rising. Every time that you do a HR disciplinary case and that anything electronic is involved, a spreadsheet, an email, web surfing, a laptop, a mobile phone, a USB stick, every single time that you do a HR disciplinary case that involves electronic evidence, that might end up in court. And if it ends up in court, you will be subject to the court rules for evidence. So your first response must, you see, after a forensics course, you might decide, we will never do a forensic investigation. But what we will do is we will do first response, which is the cheap and easy way of seizing data in a court-approved manner. Then we might go to an outside agency like Espion, and we might get Espion to do the investigation for us. But if we tamper with the evidence, if we go and muck about with the evidence before we call Espion, then that evidence becomes unsubmittable in a court of law. So even if you're calling the experts in, if you call the experts in too late, there's nothing they can do. If you've already manipulated the data, that data is no longer submittable in a court of law. The people who make good CHFI candidates actually are much wider than you expect. The CHFI program is not highly technical. Forensics is more about a process, and there are technical elements on it, but you don't have to be uber tech to be able to do forensics. IT managers make a great forensics person. Security consultants, I'm even suggesting HR or finance in certain businesses can be forensics. I've taught quite a few forensics accountants how to sieve evidence, because if you're doing forensics accounts to look for fraud or embezzlement in a business, when you find that fraud and embezzlement, you've got to secure your evidence. So we've actually worked with people diverse as accountants and lawyers and solicitors on the CHFI program. And the goal of it is to both skill and accredit you for initial response and the investigation process that comes afterwards. Last little sales pitch. There's only one real slide of a sales pitch. I hope you don't mind. Look, we believe in Espion and Nemstar that our course is significantly different to every other forensics course that you can find. We are corporate forensics. We have invested a large amount of money in a mobile hardware forensics lab and forensic software. We run real cases on real hard drives using real hardware. What you will find in a majority of forensic courses is they will talk about it, they will use open source software, but you'll never actually get to use the hardware and the software that you're going to need to use in real life. So we have Pele cases full of Tableau kit, and we have literally got £5,000 sterling worth of mobile forensics labs that we use. And we do a full day, a whole day. The Wednesday on the course is normally the intensive lab day. We don't just do an exam-focused boot camp, which you will find in a majority of other providers. We try to truly give you the hands-on skills that you're going to need to do it, along with the exam-focused bit as well. So we do both.